Welcome back, learner, to another deep dive. And, usually when we approach ancient history, it's kind of like walking through a museum.
Oh, absolutely. Everything is safely behind glass.
Right. It's properly labeled. It's completely static. You read the little placard and nod politely, and you just move on to the next exhibit.
Yeah, we tend to view the ancient past as something entirely settled and, distant.
Exactly. But today, we are basically shattering that glass. We're looking at a massive stack of sources today.
We really are. Academic analyses, archaeological records, ancient Roman and Jewish texts.
And they are all focused on one of the most famous and definitely most debated passages in human history. We were talking about the Gospel of John, specifically chapter 20, verses 1 through 9.
Right. And I think we should clarify right up front, the mission here isn't to preach to you or, tell you what to believe.
No, not at all. We are going to investigate this ancient text like a literary and historical crime scene.
Because what these sources reveal is that this narrative, it isn't just a simple religious claim, it's incredibly layered.
It really is. It's a brilliant piece of storytelling that involves ancient Greek verb progressions, a nailed heel bone, and of all things, a piece of folded laundry.
The folded laundry is my favorite part. But the text itself actually invites that kind of forensic, detailed investigation right from the start.
Yeah, set the scene for us.
Well, if you look at how the author of John sets it up, it doesn't begin with some grand, shining miracle. It begins with a very specific, almost haunting atmospheric detail.
Right.
Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, and the text specifically notes she goes, quote, "Well, it was still dark."
Okay, I want to pause right there, because obviously it's early morning. But in a highly symbolic text like this, a detail like that is, well, it's never just a weather report.
Oh, no, it's doing heavy theological lifting.
Yeah.
In the broader theology of John's writing, darkness and light are massive foundational symbols. Darkness represents a lack of understanding. It represents alienation and a lack of faith.
Why?
So when the narrative starts while it was still dark, it's signaling to the reader that we are starting in a place of total confusion.
Like Israel's darkest hour seems entirely unresolved.
Exactly. The disciples are terrified, they're hiding from the authorities, and the story literally begins with an absence. The heavy stone sealing the tomb is gone, and the body inside is gone.
And Mary Magdalene's immediate reaction isn't to fall to her knees and shout, hallelujah, a miracle.
Right.
Her first thought is a completely rational, real-world assumption. She sees the stone moved and immediately concludes they have taken the Lord. She assumes a grave robbery.
Which was incredibly common back then. John portrays the emergence of this belief not as a prepackaged conclusion that everyone just accepts instantly, but as a staggered, almost confusing progression.
So Mary assumes theft.
Yeah, and she runs back to get Peter and another disciple who is referred to in the text as the beloved disciple. And they literally foot race back to the tomb to see what has happened.
And here is where the camera lens really starts to, slowly come into focus. The sources dive deep into the original Greek text here, and they highlight this fascinating sequence.
It's so cool.
The author uses 3 completely different Greek verbs for the word seeing as these 2 men arrive at the tomb.
The linguistic progression is brilliant. First, you have the beloved disciple. He outruns Peter, right? He arrives at the tomb first, bends down, looks in, but he stays outside.
Okay.
The Greek verb used for his action is blepai. It basically means to notice or to simply glance at something.
Just taking in the raw visual data.
Exactly. He perceives that the linen burial cloths are lying there in the dark, but he doesn't process what it means. He doesn't draw a conclusion.
He's just taking in the perimeter of the crime scene. He sees the tape, he sees the mess, but he's not investigating yet.
Right. Then Peter catches up. And Peter, being the brash personality he is always described as, doesn't wait outside. He just barges right into the tomb.
Of course he does.
The verb shifts here to theory. This is the root where we get the English word theorize. It means to scrutinize, to observe carefully, to act as a detective analyzing forensic evidence.
So Peter's looking at the specific layout of the details.
Yes. He sees the main burial cloths, the Othonia, and he notices something highly unusual about the sudarium.
Let's define that. The sudarium is the face cloth, right?
It is. It's a Latin term for a sweat cloth or face cloth that was placed over the head of the deceased. It was very common in the burial practices of the time.
Okay.
And the text explicitly notes that this particular cloth wasn't just tossed aside in a heap with the other linens. It was entateiligmenon.
Entateiligmenon.
Yeah, a Greek word that translates to rolled or folded up. and it was placed in a spot entirely by itself.
Okay, let's unpack this with a modern analogy.
Sure.
Imagine you come home from work, your front door is wide open, the lock is busted, and you immediately think you've been robbed.
Panic sets in.
Right. You rush into your bedroom. Now, a frantic burglar might leave a huge mess, ripping through your drawers, tossing clothes everywhere.
Definitely.
What a burglar does not do is steal your heavy mattress, take the time to carefully strip the bed sheets, and then neatly fold your pillowcases and leave them sitting perfectly squared up on the nightstand.
No, absolutely not.
So the folded laundry in this ancient tomb is the physical clue that completely shifts the narrative. It tells the observer this wasn't a frantic crime.
Body snatchers don't carefully unwrap a corpse in the dark before they steal it.
Right. They just grab the body and run. This scene was deliberate. It was orderly.
The orderliness of the scene entirely contradicts the chaos of a theft. As we said, grave robbery was a massive problem in antiquity, but this scene doesn't fit the profile of a robbery at all.
And that leads to the third verb.
Yes, that realization leads to the third Greek verb for seeing. The beloved disciple finally steps inside the tomb, looks at this deliberately folded cloth, and the verb used is eiden. He perceives with deep internal insight. The text says he saw and believed.
He finally connects the dots. The physical evidence sparks this initial belief that something completely unprecedented has happened.
Exactly.
But, and the sources point this out, the physical evidence only gets them so far. Because the very next verse, verse 9, introduces a huge complication.
It really does.
The beloved disciples saw and believed, but then it immediately says, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead.
Right.
So the folded laundry proves it wasn't a robbery. But seeing folded linen doesn't automatically equal a theological resurrection.
No, it doesn't.
How did they make that massive intellectual leap from a weird physical crime scene to the conclusion that this was a divine event?
Well, that requires us to look at the intellectual framework of the early Christian community. They repeatedly made a very specific foundational claim.
Which was,
You see it in one of the earliest recorded traditions we have, preserved in the letters of the Apostle Paul, specifically 1 Corinthians 15. Paul writes that Christ was raised on the third day according to the scriptures.
according to the scriptures.
Yes. That phrase, according to the scriptures, is a massive anchor for them. They believed their ancient Hebrew texts predicted this exact moment.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back here because this is something that always trips me up.
Go for it.
If you scour the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
looking for a single crystal clear verse that explicitly says the Messiah will be crucified by Romans and then resurrect on the exact third day, you aren't going to find it.
You definitely won't find that sentence.
Right. There's no isolated literal insert miracle here prediction. They were just checking off a list. So aren't they just retconning the Old Testament, like making the pieces fit after the fact to justify what they thought happened?
To a modern reader who expects prophecies to read like a literal fortune cookie, it can absolutely look like retconning.
Yeah, it does.
But the sources explain that ancient Jewish interpretation didn't work like that. The early followers of Jesus used a hermeneutical method called typology, along with a tradition of commentary known as midrash.
Typology. Okay.
They didn't just look for isolated sentences. They looked at deep historical patterns, recurring events, and structural figures in their sacred texts.
Oh, interesting.
They understood those patterns as prophetic shadows or types that pointed forward to a greater culmination. It's about recognizing a fractal pattern that repeats throughout history.
Okay, so it's less about a crystal ball and more about a hidden architectural blueprint. Give me an example of how they read these patterns.
A classic example Jesus himself references in the text is the sign of Jonah.
With the whale guy.
Exactly. Jonah the prophet was swallowed by a great fish, descended into the dark, chaotic depths of the sea, and emerged alive after 3 days and 3 nights. To the modern mind, that's just a narrative about a disobedient prophet. To the ancient Jewish Christian mind, it is a divinely planted structural pattern. Descent into the deep, 3 days of darkness, and a miraculous emergence.
Wow, okay. I see the pattern.
Another powerful example the sources cite is the prophet Hosea, chapter 6, verse 2, which says, "After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up."
But originally, in its historical context, Hosea was writing about the entire nation of Israel, right?
He was.
He was talking about a collective national restoration, not a single person coming back to life.
True. But through the lens of the empty tomb, early Christians read that typologically. If Jesus is the ultimate representative of Israel, the true king who embodies the nation, then Israel's historical pattern becomes his personal pattern.
That's fascinating.
They were reading their own sacred text backward through the lens of this empty tomb to see an architecture that was there all along, and they also used logical forensic arguments derived from those texts.
Like what?
Take Peter's speech in the book of Acts, chapter 2. Peter stands up in front of a crowd and quotes Psalm 16, a famous psalm written by King David that says, "You will not abandon my soul to Hades or let your Holy One see corruption."
We should probably clarify the translation there because Hades makes it sound like Greek mythology.
Good point. A vital clarification. The original Hebrew word is Sheol, which is simply the realm of the dead, the grave.
Right.
The Greek translation of the Old Testament used the word Hades. Anyway, Peter argues this text like a prosecuting attorney. He tells the crowd, look, King David was a great patriarch, but David died, he was buried, and his physical body absolutely saw corruption.
It decayed?
Exactly. We know exactly where his tomb is. Therefore, logically, David couldn't have been writing about himself. He was writing prophetically about a future Messiah, a holy one whose body would actually be spared from physical decay.
Okay, so we have the internal logic of the community. We see how they piece together the physical anomaly of the tomb with this radical typological rereading of their ancient scriptures. But all of this is internal to their religious bubble. Does the external world, the secular, historical dirt and stone of the Roman Empire, corroborate any of this?
That's the big question.
Because if I'm playing devil's advocate, how do we know medieval monks didn't just forge all these historical documents centuries later to back up their own religion?
That is a fundamental question of historical methodology, and the sources deal with it rigorously.
Okay.
Historians use tools like textual criticism, independent attestation, and the criterion of embarrassment to authenticate ancient documents. And what they find is that history and archaeology cannot prove a miracle.
Right, you can't dig up empirical proof of a resurrection.
Exactly. However, what secular history and archaeology do robustly corroborate is the historical context, the physical setting, and specifically, the brutal reality of the crucifixion itself. And they do this through hostile witnesses.
Hostile witnesses are the best kind of evidence. They have zero motivation to make you look good. Who are you talking about?
We're talking about elite Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, and the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus.
Okay, let's hear about Tacitus.
He was a Roman senator and historian writing in the early 2nd century. He was a wealthy aristocrat who despised lower-class movements. In his annals, he explicitly mentions a group called Christians, who derived their name from a man called Christus.
And what did he say about him?
Tacitus records that this Christus suffered the extreme penalty crucifixion under the reign of the Emperor Tiberius by the sentence of the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate.
And Tacitus completely hated this movement. The sources note that Roman writers viewed early Christianity as a malignant superstition. They thought it was a bizarre, dangerous cult.
They absolutely loathed it. And similarly, the Babylonian Talmud, a central text of rabbinic Judaism compiled over centuries, contains traditions noting the execution of Yeshu on the eve of Passover.
So these texts aren't Christian propaganda.
Not at all. They are hostile records documenting a nuisance. But by complaining about it and by documenting its origins, they prove that the starting point of the story, the execution of this specific person by this specific Roman official on a specific holiday, really happened.
It wasn't a myth concocted in a monastery 1,000 years later.
Exactly. It grounds the narrative in actual soil.
And speaking of soil, the physical dirt of the Middle East backs up these texts. For a long time, skeptics questioned whether Pontius Pilate was even a real historical figure, right?
Oh, yeah. He didn't appear in the archaeological record. He was just a name in the texts.
But then, in 1961, archaeologists were digging in the ruins of Caesarea Maritima, a coastal city in Israel. They turned over a piece of limestone that had been repurposed as a step in a staircase.
Such a wild discovery.
It had a Latin inscription dedicating a building to the Emperor Tiberius, and it clearly read, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea.
The Pilate stone, carved right there in rock. The bureaucracy of the Roman Empire catching up with the historical texts.
It's amazing.
And the sources point to an even more visceral, chilling archaeological find regarding the reality of crucifixion. In a neighborhood in northern Jerusalem called Givat HaMiftar, excavators discovered an ossuary, a bone box.
Okay.
It contained the remains of a 1st-century man named Yehohanan. What makes Johann crucial to this investigation is that his right heel bone was found with a heavy iron Roman nail driven completely through it.
Oh, wow. That takes the story entirely out of the realm of abstract theology and puts it right into brutal physical reality.
It reveals the physical mechanics of the punishment. The nail had apparently hit a hard knot in the olive wood of the cross, bent into a hook shape, and they literally couldn't remove it from his foot after he died.
So they had to bury him with the nail still in his bone.
Yes, it demonstrates the traumatic bodily reality of the execution method described in the Gospels. The sources also mention that Jewish customs of that era, heavily documented by Josephus, demanded urgent burial before sunset, even for executed criminals.
Which perfectly aligns with the gospel accounts.
Exactly, the frantic rush to get Jesus off the cross and into a tomb before the Friday Sabbath began.
Which explains exactly why the women were coming back in the dark on Sunday morning. They had to finish applying the burial spices they didn't have time for on Friday.
Right. Furthermore, the heavy rolling stones mentioned in the texts to seal the tomb are archaeologically accurate for elite rock-hewn tombs of the Second Temple period around Jerusalem.
The historical stage is set flawlessly. The execution is real, the political figures are real, the brutal mechanics of the nails are real, the tomb style is real.
Yes.
But this brings us to the ultimate question of the deep dive. So what?
Big so what, yeah.
We've analyzed the crime scene, we've decoded the ancient scriptural typology, we've examined the Roman texts and the nailed heel bone. Why does any of this matter to someone listening today?
We have to move from the event itself to the massive historical impact it had. If we look at how the early Christians processed this event, the resurrection was never meant to be just a magic trick to prove Jesus was powerful. It wasn't a happy epilogue tacked onto a tragic story.
Right.
In their theological framework, which was articulated heavily by the Apostle Paul and later expanded by massive historical thinkers like Athanasius, the resurrection is the ultimate divine verdict.
Divine verdict.
Paul writes in Romans that Jesus was delivered up for our trespasses and raised for our justification. The cross was viewed as the payment, and the empty tomb was the public declaration that the payment was accepted.
You know, I read an analogy regarding Athanasius' view of this that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't view it merely as the soul surviving death, which was a pretty common Greek philosophical idea at the time. Athanasius viewed the resurrection almost biologically.
How so?
Like a virus death swallowed a living cell.
Mm.
But that cell was actually an antidote.
Oh, that's good.
Once inside, the antidote destroyed the virus from the inside out. It was a complete reversal of physical decay, inaugurating a brand new creation.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Christ defeats death by entering into its very machinery and breaking the system from within.
Yeah.
And the psychological explosion that resulted from that belief is staggering. You have a group of terrified disciples hiding in a locked, dark room because their leader was just publicly humiliated and executed by the most powerful military empire on earth.
Completely broken people.
And suddenly, within days, they walk out into the light. They become completely unstoppable global messengers. They look the Roman Empire in the eye, willingly face lions and executioners, and essentially say, "We aren't afraid of you anymore because you can't hold us in the ground."
It's a profound psychological shift, but it went beyond just their internal courage, right? The sources point out that this belief literally changed the human calendar. It changed how people structured their week.
It did. For centuries, the Jewish people had observed the Sabbath on the seventh day, Saturday. It was foundational to their entire ethnic and religious identity.
Right, it was commanded by God in the Ten Commandments.
Exactly. It was so central that the Roman Empire actually gave Jewish people special legal exemptions from military service just so they could observe the Saturday Sabbath.
Which means shifting their day of worship wasn't just a casual scheduling change. It was incredibly dangerous.
Very dangerous.
By moving their sacred day, these early Jewish believers were risking their legal protections under Roman law, they were risking excommunication from their families, and they were supposedly breaking one of the Ten Commandments. It's an insane sociological shift. Why would they do it?
Early Christian documents like the Didache, which is essentially a late first century instruction manual for early church communities, and the writings of early apologists like Justin Martyr show exactly why.
Yep.
These Jewish believers suddenly shifted their primary weekly gathering to the first day of the week, Sunday. Justin Martyr explicitly connects this shift to two things.
Which are?
First, Sunday was the first day of creation in the Genesis account, when God made light out of darkness. And second, it was the day Jesus Christ rose from the dead.
They link the empty tomb to the dawn of a completely new creation.
Exactly. The resurrection was an event of such seismic magnitude that it demanded a completely new day of worship.
Wow. Let's zoom out and bring this entire journey together.
Hmm.
We started our deep dive in the dark, standing outside an empty tomb with Mary Magdalene, assuming a simple grave robbery.
Right.
We followed Peter and the beloved disciple as they rushed in, moving from just glancing at the scene to scrutinizing it, to finally perceiving the profound meaning of those deliberately, chillingly folded linen cloths.
You folded laundry.
The folded laundry. We saw how the early followers had to read their ancient scriptures backward, finding hidden architectural blueprints and typological patterns in Jonah and the Psalms. We anchored the story in the hard, unforgiving reality of hostile Roman historians Pilate's stone and the horrific reality of a nailed heel bone. And finally, we saw how that belief didn't just stay trapped in a first-century tomb. It completely rewired the psychology of his followers and literally shifted the human calendar.
It really is a masterful convergence of literature, history, and theology. And it leaves us with a final implication to mull over.
With that,
Regardless of your personal beliefs, whether you view this text as divine revelation or just fascinating ancient history, think about how this single narrative altered the human perception of time itself.
time itself.
Yeah, before this movement, most ancient cultures viewed time as cyclical. Like the seasons, history was just an endless, repeating loop of rise and fall, life and death with no ultimate destination.
Just a wheel spinning forever.
Exactly. But the claim of the resurrection introduced a radical new idea into the global consciousness, linear time. The idea that history is actually marching toward a specific destination, a new creation. Our entire modern concept of progress, the belief that the future can fundamentally break the cycles of the past and become something entirely new, is a direct, continuing ripple effect of that empty tomb.
The idea that the wheel can actually be broken?
Yeah.
That is incredible. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, learner. Keep asking tough questions, keep looking past the obvious, and keep searching for those hidden patterns in the world around you. We'll catch you on the next one.